Chapter 4 Conversations Part 1 One thing that James learned very quickly was that Regulus was fast. He was off the bus in literally 5 seconds, and he barely had enough time to get a hold of his bearings. Regulus had just told him so much, and James knew he hadn't meant to. Regret had been very obvious on his face, especially when James was actually faltering for words. And of course, James himself felt regret for just walking in there and yelling at him like that. James didn't do things like that. He preferred to talk things out, and he would do it if Regulus would just stop running away from him. James followed, but not closely enough. He walked the streets of Charleston like he knew exactly where he was going. And it made James wonder what exactly Regulus had been doing for the past couple of hours. After the show, at least, when he did make it to the tour bus, it looked like he had been trying to sleep. James just assumed he had been like this all day, but he should have known better. The tour bus was likely much more too suffocating to spend that many hours on. Regulus took a sharp right, and James noticed he was making a beeline for a park. Was this what he had done today? Could you not take a hint? Regulus's voice rolled back to him, and James smiled. No, not really, he said, picking up the pace now. Regulus, just stop walking, or, well, you're running at this rate, love. Why are you? Do not call me that, Regulus said, wiping around and stopping so suddenly that James collided with him, their chests bumping together before they both reeled back. Call you what? James asked as he searched his memory. Did he call Regulus something? He couldn't know for sure. Sometimes bad names just slipped out of his mouth before he could stop them, but most of the time people didn't mind. They were just terms of endearment, really. What do you want? Regulus asked, sounding slightly exasperated. From up close, he looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. His hair was still all messed up, and his eyes themselves were dull. James thought they were magnificent either way, dull or shining. But they still showed his exhaustion perfectly. To talk. I don't want to talk. You kind of said a lot of stuff back there. I wouldn't feel right if I just left that all in the air. That's exactly what I want you to do, he said. James never did learn how to just leave things be. His parents taught him to never go to bed angry, and it translated into most parts of his life. Regulus clearly was harboring a lot of anger towards James, yes, but also towards life in general. You're upset. Regulus paused for a moment, and he had to blink a couple of times before responding. I'm fine. You lost your job. You are allowed to be upset, James told him. He didn't even know what he'd do if they kicked him out of the band, or he suddenly couldn't perform on stage. It was what kept his heart beating. They both became aware of the fact that they were in public when a person walked right in the middle of their conversation. It made Regulus start walking away again, but this time he didn't go very far, just settling onto a park bench. James took a moment, now that Regulus wasn't trying to run away, to appreciate the park. It was a waterfront, and there was a gentle sound of crashing waves that filled the night. There weren't very many people there, which made sense because it was getting pretty late out. Did you know this place was here? James asked, taking a seat next to him. Regulus scooted as far away as he could get, and James pretended like that didn't hurt his feelings. Was it really that bad to be around him? I went on a walk, Regulus responded, not looking over at him once. Do you want to talk about it? My walk? Regulus said, a tiny smile playing on his lips now. Oh, yeah, it was grand. Said hi to a couple of strangers, stopped for coffee. Regulus, James interrupted. He didn't try to hide the smile on his face, not even for a second. I didn't know he would want me at the show, Regulus said quietly. It didn't really cross my mind. James wasn't angry anymore. Not really. The Black brothers were complicated. He had known that for as long as he had known Sirius. Clearly, there was a lot more going on than he had originally thought. Yeah, well, you seem you have a lot on your mind, James said softly. There was something about the two of them in the moonlight, having a stilted conversation with awkward pauses every couple of seconds, that made James smile. He didn't want to break the peace by speaking too loudly. They weren't really sure how to act around each other, how to talk to each other in a way that flowed naturally. Some of us are capable of following more than one train of thought, Regulus said dryly. James laughed, relaxing a bit more into the bench and looking up at the sky. Stars weren't really visible. They hardly ever were in big cities. But the night sky was beautiful nonetheless. It was comforting knowing that the stars were there anyway, even if you couldn't see them. So, how does your wrist feel? James asked, trying to start up a conversation. Broken. In hindsight, you should have expected Regulus to say something like that. Something sarcastic and obvious. Is your heart broken too? James asked jokingly. Regulus looked at him this time, an amused sort of look on his face. What? Your heart? Is it broken? Are you offering? James shook his head. I would never break your heart, Regulus. He shrugged, turning his head to look up at the sky like James had been doing just moments ago. I would never give you the chance to. James tried not to think too hard about his words. He couldn't fathom a world where he would even want to break Regulus's heart, just like he couldn't imagine a world where he would be given the chance to cherish it, to hold it, and keep it safe. Have you ever been heartbroken? Regulus didn't answer him for a long time, and if it wasn't for the soft sound of his breathing, James would have thought that he had left. He shouldn't have asked him that. They were still practically strangers. Nobody asked a stranger about their heartbreaks. The silence stretched, and James grew nervous enough that he dug his pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, putting one in between his teeth and searching his other pockets for a lighter. The sounds and movements caused Regulus to look over, and James noticed him staring, but said nothing about it. Can I have one? James almost dropped the cigarette out of his mouth in the shock, and he looked at Regulus with wide eyes. He specifically remembers Sirius telling him that Regulus didn't do drugs or smoke. Had he been wrong? James supposed it was a possibility. This was the most time they had spent together in years, and maybe things had changed. Is this a test? James asked, blowing out the smoke. No. Do you smoke? Regulus shrugged and reached for the pack that was sitting on the bench in between them, grabbing one without any sort of hesitation. Does it matter? James shook his head, handing over the lighter without much thought put into it. I feel a bit like I'm robbing you of your innocence. As if he had done it before, Regulus put the cigarette between his lips, letting it dangle loosely. He cupped one hand around it to block the wind and flickered the lighter, sucking in as it caught before letting out a deep breath. Sorry to break it to you, James, Regulus said, a smile visible in the upturns of his lips. But I lost my innocence a long time ago. James raised an eyebrow in mock surprise. There I was thinking you were a saint. It was almost weird the way they just settled into an easy back and forth, smoking cigarettes on the bench front in Charleston. They could forget about the real world for a moment. They could forget about Regulus's broken wrist. and James could forget about his friend falling too quickly into addiction and into fame. Where are we going next? James gasped dramatically. You mean you don't know? They were all very excited about their next stop. Plus, they got to spend a couple of days there, and James was planning to really enjoy it. Believe it or not, I don't have enough time to memorize your touring schedule. You had all day, James countered. I was busy all day. Clearly not with anything that was important. Regulus rolled his eyes. Are you gonna tell me? Nope, James said, a wide smile. It was more fun to keep it a secret, especially if he didn't know yet. I can literally just look it up, Regulus said, starting to pull out his phone. James practically lunged forward to grab it, not wanting to ruin that was now going to be a surprise. Got the vague idea that Regulus did not like to be surprised with things, like going on the tour, for example. James absolutely loved surprises of all kinds. Your criminal charges are adding up, he said after a short fight over his phone. James had won probably because he actually had the ability to use both of his arms, but either way, he was still victorious. I haven't committed any crimes, he said. Kidnapping, armed robbery. I'm not armed, James interrupted. Regulus' gaze went down to his actual arm for a split second, and it took everything in James's body not to flex them. When one had Regulus's attention, they had to try not to do stupid things for fear of losing it. James was learning that rather quickly too. Sirius, Peter, and Remus were already back at the bus by the time they got back. James had really tried to avoid that since he knew Sirius would have something to say about it, and Remus would say something about them making everyone late. All eyes turned to them the moment they stepped onto the bus. Regulus went first, not saying a word as he went to the back of the bus, shutting the door at the time and leaving James to deal with them alone. Traitor. James, Sirius said, his voice a bit too casual. He smiled. Hey, he said, letting the bus door shut. So, tell me, Sirius said, leaning forward a little bit and clasping his hands together. Remus and Peter seemed to roll their eyes at the exact time. You skipped on hanging out with your best friends to do what exactly? Padfoot, I swear. Are you sleeping with him? No. Promise? I came back to the bus to ask him why he wasn't at the show, James told him. Sirius crossed his arms over his chest, but James already knew that he was going to win this argument. Truthfully, they never really argued. They just talked about whatever was upsetting them and got it out of the way. And why wasn't he there? You didn't invite him. His face dropped slightly, like the mask he had been wearing all night just vanished when those words came out of James's mouth. It came right back up a second later, though, and he had that stubborn and defiant look on his face again. Really, they shouldn't be having this conversation right there. Remus and Pete were just sort of sitting in between them, sharing awkward looks, and he was almost positive that Regulus was listening in. It was hard not to, in a space so small. I shouldn't have had to, Sirius said. Padfoot, come on, Remus said, a bit exasperated. This doesn't concern you, Mooney, he snapped, and it reminded James that they had been out drinking. It was too late to just take Sirius off of the bus and have a conversation alone with him. The driver had already started moving, and that meant they were on the way to the next stop. It was going to be a very long night, at least a 9-hour drive, and that didn't include any of the stops that the driver might need to take. Hey, don't yell at him just because prongs. I really don't want to talk about this anymore, Sirius interrupted. Fantastic. Go talk to your brother then. Sirius got up, but rather than walk all the way to the back of the bus, he climbed into his bunk and shut the curtain rather dramatically. Good. He needed a nap to just sleep off the alcohol. He had a lot to drink, Peter commented quietly. James already knew that though, so he just shrugged and went to his bunk. He was tired. Apparently, talking to the Black Brothers took a lot out of a person. After 40 minutes, he realized he could not sleep. Not at all. He was hot and uncomfortable and would have done absolutely anything for a shower at that moment. That was simply not an option, so he turned on the tiny light he had in his bunk and took out his journal. He always turned to writing when he was tired. It either ended in a great song or it made him sleepy enough to actually get some rest. At least he was feeling inspired with the introduction of Regulus to their dynamic. New things and new situations always brought out something. He knew it wasn't smart to acknowledge the butterflies he felt every time he saw him, but really James couldn't help it. Regulus was beautiful, and James would be a fool if he pretended not to notice it. Of course, he was aware that Regulus would probably never even look at him in the same way, so James was repressing it as much as he could. If all he got was a few sarcastic comments, he was more than fine with it. His guitar simply would not fit in his bunk, not to mention it was on a completely different bus, so he had to resort to humming quietly. He was pretty sure that everyone else was asleep. He hadn't heard a sound since he had gone to bed. I feel close. Well, maybe I'm not. Heaven knows. It's a spotlight stuck on the ceiling. Why are these the things that I'm feeling? Apparently, he had been wrong. Not even 5 minutes after he started trying to write something, somebody was opening the curtain to his bunk. Maybe he should have been more surprised, but he really wasn't. They always used to do this when they were in school, just occupying each other's space when something wasn't right. And after the conversation earlier, well, Sirius didn't like to go to bed angry either. James's mother had taught both of them that. It was a tight fit, but Sirius climbed in anyway, sitting opposite of James. The bunks were tall enough for them to sit up straight, but just barely. Can sleep? Sirius said, taking note of the atmosphere James had created. He shrugged, not stopping him when he reached for the journal. Some of their most popular songs had been created in that thing. It was old and leather bound, a gift from his father that was starting to run out of pages. Normally, James would have workshopped his ideas with Sirius, but they both clearly had some things they needed to say, and the song could wait. Did he said anything else? Sirius asked quietly. It took just a couple of seconds for James to catch up and realize he was asking about Regulus. Yes, James said, remembering just how much Regulus had shared without meaning to. It was for that reason that he decided not to tell Sirius. It was for the best to not get in the middle of whatever they had going on. But you should really talk to him yourself. He sighed, loudly and dramatically. I knew you would say something like that. James smiled the way that he always did, but he was reminded how well Sirius knew him and how well he knew Sirius. It was easy and comfortable, and probably the most constant thing in his life. What can I say? I am predictable. Sirius rolled his eyes, shaking his head slightly. No, not predictable. No? He thought he was, genuinely. He was mostly the same, stagnant and never changing. He was always the one with the advice, the one saying things that Sirius needed to hear. No, I just know you so bloody well. James laughed. Can't argue with that. Do you think he's still awake? I hope not, James said before he could think better of it. Sirius raised an eyebrow, and James couldn't very well lie to him. He might have said something about not sleeping well. Stubborn git won't take his pain meds, Sirius mumbled under his breath. Even with the knowledge that his brother was probably awake, and also could very probably hear them. Sirius didn't leave, not for a while. They talked and apologized and made big plans for their next stop, which was going to be 3 days long. They would get to sleep in a hotel, take a shower, have a real meal or two. They had just started their tour, but James already understood how other artists got tired so quickly. The hours were weird. You had hardly any time to yourself, and you were never in one place long enough to actually enjoy it. Get some sleep, idiot, Sirius said, climbing out of his bunk when Prong started lolling off. He didn't even muster a simple good night before sleep took over him.